Hi everyone. For our first screencast in our consciousness unit, I'm just going to talk a little bit about introduction to consciousness. So when we talk about consciousness, we're really focusing on our own awareness of what is happening and the things around us. So this is a lot of what the unit will be based on. Consciousness can vary. It can include the unconscious, which goes back to Freud. It can also be altered by things such as hypnosis and drugs. So those are some things that we will be covering in this unit while I am not with you. All right, so we're going to be able to explain consciousness and then talk about the different levels of consciousness by looking at these notes. If you don't have your notebooks out, I would recommend you taking notes at this point because a lot of this information, while it is covered in your Barron's book, I do feel a little bit better working through it with you. All right, I do really like this activity and I want you to think about it. When we take a look at all of these activities that are up on the screen, I do want you to think about which ones you are most aware and which ones you are least aware. If you were to rank these, if we were in class, I would ask you to share this out with a partner. But I do think it's important to consider how aware we are when we are doing something. Like, how aware are you right now about the things that I'm saying while you are listening to this screencast? You may be way more aware when you are getting ready for the prom because that is more important to you, like here, than you are when you are watching a new series on Netflix, or maybe vice versa. Sitting on the bus coming back from a field trip, you may be least aware because you're not driving, you know you are heading back to school, so that just requires a little bit less mental energy. All right, if we were in class, we would share out. If you want to share out with a partner, you are welcome to do that. All right, let's start your notes. So let's define consciousness. So I've used the word aware about 6 or 7 times already in this screencast. So when we talk about consciousness, we're just talking about our awareness of our existence. So the degree we are aware of what's going on inside and outside of our bodies. So consciousness varies. It depends on the situation, and it definitely depends on what is going on around us. You may feel less levels of awareness when you are in school and sitting through a lecture. You may be less aware of what's going on inside or outside of your body in certain circumstances. You may have a heightened sense of awareness if you are in an uncomfortable situation or you are nervous. So consciousness can really depend on what is happening around us. Now this screencast is going to go a little bit faster than when I usually give notes in class. So if you need to pause the video, pause it in order to write this information down. But I am going to move on for the sake of time. All right, with our consciousness, we have a single focus. I know students always say they are really good multitaskers. Some adults think they're really good multitaskers. However, in reality, we give our attention to one thing at a time. Even if we can perform 2 tasks at once, we really are focusing our awareness on just one thing within or outside of ourselves. So for example, I currently am sitting at a desk and I'm holding a cup of tea. But I'm not really thinking about holding the cup of tea. I'm thinking about how I'm going to explain this slide of notes. So I'm focusing my single attention on the notes rather than holding and drinking the cup of tea, even if I can do 2 things at once. These are the different levels of consciousness. So we're going to briefly go through them, and you should notice some of these, subconscious and unconscious, should sound familiar because it is a throwback to Freud and the psychoanalytic theories that we've been talking about. Let's talk about conscious awareness. Conscious awareness is exactly what it sounds like. This is anything we are aware of or feeling at the moment, and we get this from our senses. So, for example, you may be hearing my voice right now. Or if you are not hearing my voice, then I have no idea how you'll hear this lecture. Maybe you're looking at the slides, but you are using sight to take in the words. Conscious awareness is all of our sensations and perceptions, feelings at a current moment. We also have waking consciousness, which is just what we consider and psychologists consider our normal alert awareness. So this is like what we tend to consider every day, like when we are focusing on something. Non-conscious are all of the biological processes that are taking place that we don't even notice because they are so automatic. So for example, we typically do not notice that we are blinking because this is so automatic. We typically do not notice that our heart is beating unless there is something like our heart is racing because we're in that fight or flight mode. So when it comes to non-conscious, these are things that we just typically do not notice that are happening biologically within our bodies. Next, let's talk about pre-conscious. Pre-conscious is stored information about your environment that you are not currently aware of, but you can easily call to mind when you're asked about it. So for me, I always think about my earliest memories, which are pre-conscious memories, because the earliest thing that I remember is meeting my younger brother in the hospital. So that's very easy for me to recall. I remember that moment very clearly. And if someone were to say, what is the earliest memory you remember? Immediately that would come up for me. I'm sure you guys can recall something from your childhood, like your favorite teacher or a really good experience you had or something like that. So these are things that we are not aware of and we typically don't think of, but are very easy for us to call to mind. So they don't require that digging that you would need with like a subconscious or unconscious memory. Okay, so this brings us to our subconscious. We've talked about our subconscious a whole bunch when we talked about Freud, but this is information we've been exposed to but we can't recall, and it influences our behavior. So in order to get to the root of this subconscious and eventually the unconscious states of consciousness, we would need to go through some therapy, be prompted to remember these things. When it comes to the subconscious, we are influenced by an experience that we may not remember. So you may have experienced some unfortunate trauma when you were younger. You cannot recall the details of it, but it definitely influences who you are. And then lastly, we come to the unconscious. Back to Freud, it's an invisible force. It causes conflict between our attitudes and our actions. Unconscious things we cannot recall easily. We need a lot of prompting for this. We may not ever get to the root of it, but going back to Freud and all of these things that influence our personality, this is considered one of the lower or last states of consciousness. Just to highlight for you the different parts of the unconscious, going back to Freud again, we have these three parts. Freud believed that there's the id, the superego, and the ego. The id influences our life and death instincts. It's pleasure seeking, meaning we want immediate gratification. So this would be something like fight or flight, something that influences like us positively. We have the superego. These are standards that are set for us by someone outside of us that we try to live up to, maybe parents or society. And then lastly, our ego is our self-image. So this is who we try to be, balancing both the id and the superego. So I just want to recall these terms, make sure we're going over them because they are important when it comes to Freud. That actually takes us to the end of our States of Consciousness PowerPoint and notes. So if you have any questions, please reference your textbook or send me an email, and thanks so much.